Good day everyone, this is your girl, Jade Pihimpisaw. So for today's video, I am going to tackle about ethnocentrism and relativism. So, without further ado, let's get started. Ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is judging another culture solely by the values and standard of one's own culture. One may see his or her own culture as the correct way of living. Ethnocentrism is a term anthropologists use to describe the opinion that one's own way of life is natural or correct. Ethnocentric individuals judge other groups relative to their own ethnic group or culture, especially with concern for language, behavior, customs, and religion. William G. Sumner, a classical liberal American social scientist, defined ethnocentrism as a technical name for the view of things in which one's own group is the center of everything, and all others are scaled and rated with reference to it. He further characterized it as often leading to pride, vanity, beliefs of one's own group's superiority, and contempt of outsiders. So, in the study of anthropology, ethnocentric are people born into a particular culture that grow up observing the values and behaviors of the culture will develop a worldview that considers their culture to be the norm or the standard. So if people then experience other cultures that have different values and normal behaviors, they will find that the thought patterns appropriate to their birth culture are not appropriate for the new cultures. However, since people are accustomed to their birth culture, it can be difficult for them to see the behaviors of people from a different culture, from a different viewpoint of that culture, rather than their own culture. So, examples of ethnocentrism are the following. So, first one, an example of ethnocentrism in culture as the Asian culture across all the countries of Asia. Throughout Asia, the way of eating is to use chopsticks with every meal. These people may find it unnecessary to find that people in other societies, such as American, using forks, spoons, knives, and etc. Another example is this picture. So her belief is that her cuisine or her food or the way she cooks is the best, and it is an example of ethnocentrism. But ethnocentrism views these to stereotyping. A stereotype means is the generalizations about a group of people whereby we attribute a defined set characteristics to this group, can be positive or negative. So, these are some examples or extreme examples of ethnocentric stereotypes. First is Americans are obese and uneducated, so it is a negative, right? Asians are geniuses and bad drivers. Women are bad drivers and emotional. Men are strong and smarter than women. So these are using judgments. So now, let's proceed with cultural relativism. But first, let us define relativism. Relativism is the belief that there's no absolute truth, only the truth that a particular individual or culture happen to believe. So if you believe in relativism, then you think different people can have different views about what's moral and immoral. So cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is the idea that a person's beliefs, values, and practice should be understood based on a person's own culture and not be judged against the criteria of another. So, it was established and accepted in anthropological research by Franz Boas. Boas brought in the idea that cultural traits must be explained in specific cultural context instead of a broad reference to evolutionary trends. So he said that the art and characteristic style of a people can be understood only by studying its production as a whole. Boas' basic approach to work was the culture was to be understood from detailed studies of specific cultures. So, Boas is the founder of American and modern anthropology. He introduced the theory of cultural relativism, which is the idea of all people have equally developed cultures. This theory that holds the belief that the difference between people were the result of historical, social, and geographic conditions. He understood culture to include not only certain tastes in food, arts, and music or beliefs about religion. He assumed a much broader notion of culture defined as the totality of the mental and physical reactions and activities that characterize the behavior of the individuals composing a social group, collectively and individually in relation to their natural environment, to other groups, to members of the group itself, and of each individual to himself. So, this understanding of culture confronts anthropologists with two problems. So the first problem is how to escape the unconscious bonds of one's own culture, which inevitably bias our perceptions of and reactions to the world. And second problem is how to make sense of an unfamiliar culture. So these are some examples of cultural relativism. The first one, premarital sex. So premarital sex. Here in the Philippines, premarital sex is morally unacceptable. But if we go to other countries like America, US, or other, teenagers want to lose their virginity at a very, very, very young age. Another example is contraceptives. So here in the Philippines, we do not cease to debate on the moral unacceptability of contraceptives. In other countries, abortion is perfectly normal. More so, the use of artificial contraceptives. And lastly, the same-sex marriage. Here in the Philippines, we don't have the same-sex marriage because for us, we are abiding the rule of God if we do so. But in other countries, they have the same-sex marriage. That's why people with the same sex here in the Philippines will go to other countries to get married. So everyone, to summarize it all, ethnocentrism is the tendency to assume that one's own culture and way of life represent the norm or are superior to all others. On the other hand, cultural relativism is the viewing of people's behavior from the perspective of their own culture. So that would be all, everyone, and hope you learned something from my discussion. Thank you and God bless us all.